Hello and welcome to this session of the Device Authority Virtual Summit. Driving into the unknown, can security vulnerabilities render your vehicle uninsurable? Today we're going to be looking at this topic from a number of perspectives, including that of end sales and your personal liability, but also that of the car manufacturer and their responsibility to produce a car that is reliable and insurable. Today I'm joined by Cy West, Director of Customer Engagement at Resilience, Rob Black, CEO of Fractional CISO, and Stash Mintoff, Vice President of Business Development Automotive North America. Rob, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your organisation.
Of course, great to be here. Thanks, everyone. I'm Rob Black, founder and CEO of Fractional CISO, and we help mid-sized companies with their cybersecurity programs. Just like the conversation undoubtedly we'll have today, we're talking cyber insurance with a lot of our clients. With our IoT customers, we talk about all the different controls that can be put in place, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Simon?
Hey everyone, thank you for the invite today to join in on the discussion. My name's Cy West. I'm the Director of Customer Engagement at Resilience. I lead the large scale engagement projects, a high-performing cyber advisory team. My primary focus is really on building those strong customer relationships and providing the strategic guidance on enhancing our customers' cyber resilience. I have a background in military, served over 15 years with the Royal Marines, 8 years risk management experience, and I've been in the insurance market for the last 5 years now, advising underwriters on cyber risk and implementing incident response frameworks. I guess at Resilience, we're looking to help organizations at times, sometimes with those limited resources, to maximize their investments and effectively manage risks by balancing acceptance, mitigation, and transfer strategies. Thank you.
Excellent. And Stash?
Right, my name is Stash Mintoff. I'm Vice President of Business Development at Device Authority. I've got decades of experience in the automotive industry, starting in the automotive aftermarket and then progressing into the automotive OEM space with my tenure at Samsung Harman. And so as a consequence, I was involved quite a lot on the development of vehicles, a lot of the exposure that OEMs have in all different areas, safety, product engineering, software over-the-air updates, all that kind of stuff. And at one point, I was involved in the insurance side of the industry with collision claims and working with adjusters and so on to work within the supply chain of collision repair. So have quite a lot of experience in the automotive segment and again, most recently in the cybersecurity segment as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me today. Guess final introduction is myself. I'm Louise Jose. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at Device Authority, and I will be mediating the conversation today. Stash, seeing as you've got the majority of your experience and expertise in automotive, I was wondering if you could start us off with a couple of examples of vulnerabilities that we might see within the market itself.
Mm-hmm. So I think to begin with, it's by way of background, if you look at the steady increase of vulnerability in vehicles, it starts to a large extent from an insurer's perspective, because that's the topic of our conversation today, is allocation of risk and understanding how you create premiums and stuff like that. That's a critical part of an insurance policy and the engagement of an insurance company with their customers. So back in the day, there were various areas of safety on the vehicle that directly impacted your premium. So if you think of the inclusion of seat belts, that was a big uptick, and with Volvo really pioneering that. For those that don't know, Volvo actually donated that intellectual property to the industry by way of making cars safer, which is great. That obviously had an impact on their premiums for their customers, which was a good thing. But things like anti-lock braking, airbags, all that type of stuff, reducing accidents and death in a vehicle were key factors in the application of how premiums would be assigned to consumers. But then in the 1990s, as the automated car, or I would say the connected car, started getting really quite exciting for the OEMs, where the cars had lost a lot of their sizzle in terms of what was exciting and interesting. The advent of the connected car really has brought just a stampede of technology into really what is, you could look at it as a missile on four wheels. Very dangerous from an infrastructure point of view and cybersecurity, part of our topic today. So as that's happened, today you have, for example, on a Boeing or a fighter jet, 50 million lines of code. In a vehicle, you have 100 million lines of code. And so now you've got this huge vulnerability in the vehicle that is directly impacting insurance premiums. So an example of that would be couple of years ago, really, a Chrysler Jeep product was hacked, and the hackers took full control over the vehicle, took it off the freeway, put it into a parking lot, and as part of a jest, drove it over the side of the parking lot into a ditch. The three people, the two hackers and the driver, found this entertaining, but obviously that's not funny at all. And this has then been escalated now as an area of, on the one hand, fun, which is not fun, and on the other hand, serious intrusion into a vehicle. So one of those would be an example just recently where hackers got directly through the headlight, then through the JBL sound system, and then into the CAN bus itself. That's going into the critical brains of the vehicle itself. That's one of the first ones that I've seen where now it's not just vehicle specific, like in the first example with a Jeep, but now this is across automotive manufacturers, because it's a tier one supplier providing a headlight, an intelligent headlight, which could be fitted to multiple vehicles, Toyota, GM, Ford, whatever. So that would be one example. And then how does an insurer ascertain what does that mean to them? And another one, which is probably the most prevalent one today, is 2015 to 2019 Hyundais and Kias have been hacked by the not having engine immobilization, and insurers immediately, I think Allstate was at the beginning of that, cancelled their insurance on those vehicles. There's now been a lawsuit. It's estimated now to cost over $300 million. There's a recall process that Hyundai and Kia are currently involved with, and to try and make that right. As an update. So I'll probably stop here for some more questions and so on, but just a quick background. It's a very rapidly evolving segment in the market, and the insurers are certainly looking at this with a grave concern as you look at not just consumers using the vehicles, but rideshare and areas like that, and drive to, when you're driving, when you hire the car just to use it for when you need it, and then give it back to a pool of vehicles in the city. So
yeah, I can see how that would be quite concerning. Rob and Si, I'm guessing really from an insurance and a responsibility of the actual manufacturer itself, from that point of view, there's probably a lot we could discuss around that element, isn't there? I mean, obviously, from the manufacturer's perspective, sending out a vehicle with any sort of easy to exploit vulnerability could have a lot of damage on the overall company's reputation from that standpoint alone. But I'm guessing that they've got as having now got a responsibility to send out a vehicle that is safe and free of vulnerabilities. There's actually an implication of whose responsibility is it actually to make sure that that product is safe and usable.
So Stash's point about the 100 million plus lines of code in automobiles is really important to understand. Let's just say your developers make one critical mistake in a million lines of code. by the way, that's very unrealistic. It's probably one critical mistake in 10,000 lines of code, but let's just say 1 in a million. That means there's 100 vulnerabilities, 100 critical vulnerabilities in that brand new automobile. And the reality is there are probably thousands of critical vulnerabilities in that car. Fortunately, that's what, our family bought a new car. We went in, and I went into the auto dealers, and I said, hey, can I see the cybersecurity report for your car? They all showed me, I compared them, and I made a decision. I'm just kidding. I didn't make a decision based on that because I knew they were all not that good. I just rolled the dice and hoped for the best.
You'd be lucky if they'd have the report in the first place, wouldn't you?
They said cyber, what? So, in terms of shipping vehicles without vulnerabilities, super unrealistic. The real question is, what do we do to help mitigate that? And the answer is right now, not a lot. Fortunately, those attacks that Stash was talking about were laboratory type attacks. So like the Jeep attack, for instance, it was the driver was in on it with the researchers. They were intentionally doing that. However, you could imagine either there's some sort of major issue with a foreign power, or some other type thing where it may be some huge ransom situation where they attack and turn off the brakes in a whole class of vehicles. So this could obviously have huge safety issues for the entire world. And we don't have a solution today, but that's one of the reasons why we're talking about it.
Brilliant, thank you. So what would your input be around this particular?
Honestly, I find it fascinating. Huge amount of information from Stas there. So yeah, thank you for that. Certainly be interested in knowing, what these manufacturers are doing on their side in regards to, security by design and testing of these vehicles before they go to market. We understand, when you're writing new code, there's always going to be, vulnerabilities. But it's what are you doing on your side to sort of reduce the likelihood of these major incidents happening, let's say. In regards to coverages, there's the tech E&O coverage, tech errors and omissions. This may be part of your policy, it may not. So it's really important that when you're buying a cyber policy that you do, sit down with your broker, your insurer, and you understand exactly what is covered. I think tech E&O does tend to be sublimited anyway. So that may not give you the cover that you actually want for that type of incident. I think for ourselves, we're in the business of actually looking at the whole business in regards to the cyber risk. And I think we've seen the insurance market evolve rapidly. I know, Rob, you mentioned, how quickly the markets do evolve and the landscape changes, especially with the likes of attacks like ransomware, especially over the last sort of few years. The market's really sort of had to come together and raise what we consider to be our baseline of acceptable controls. So things like ransomware supplements you might see, as well as the original application. I think, all of this we've learned from our claims. We're lucky enough to have a feedback loop, and that feedback loop is not just for us. Okay, that information that we see in the claims, whether it's attack vectors, email compromise, open remote access, we will feed that back to our underwriters, of course, but also our brokers and our insureds. We're in, long gone are the days of we're just a policy that pays out. We want to work proactively with our customers, help them before the time of an incident. That goes without saying. I think one of the sort of things I would say is, in regards to, can a lack of controls make you uninsurable? I think because our baseline has risen, the short answer to that is, unfortunately, yes. We have seen some businesses that just aren't cyber ready before they come to market. And this is what we're trying to do different. We're saying, well, hey, actually, that's not acceptable. What can we do as an insurer to help those businesses come to market and we do that in a number of different ways. One of them is being able to sort of provide them with that risk transfer solution that provides them with a quantitative analysis, improved visibility, so monitoring on their networks and on their systems, whether it be passive scanning on the outside, or even looking to sort of API in some of the tools that you may have. All of these things really to help us notify our customers earlier, so that again they can have that more timely, effective response, and we can work with them throughout that 12 months to improve their hygiene. Whereas traditionally it's come to market cyber ready, or if you're not ready, come back in 6 months or 12 months. Well, actually, you know, that's no good for businesses, right? That's no good for these organizations. So we've taken a different stance. It's like, hey, we can meet you on your journey now, and we can provide you with some coverages. And because we can provide a dynamic policy, as their maturity improves, we can improve their coverages as well.
Does that mean, Si, that you guys are plugged in literally into the network of your customers?
So our sort of proprietary technology, no, it's all outside in passive scanning. So we scan it's all open source essentially.
It's and it's internet facing, looking at stuff from the internet.
Exactly that. So we're building up an internet footprint of them. Any of their sort of assets that we see, you know, if there's a configuration error, a vulnerability, we have our own threat intelligence team, so we can also provide them industry-specific intelligence updates as well.
That's brilliant. So, you know, really the key is building that resilient cyber posture in the first place, isn't it? Making sure that you've got enough in place to at least, you know, protect yourself as much as you can. Fantastic. So oh, you're gonna say?
No, yeah, I think no, you're absolutely right. I think it's we look at it as you know, hey, you know, incidents are going to happen, but how do we help our customers during that time so that they can still have business continuity, still add value to their customers, and respond and recover as best and as quickly as they can.
So one of the ways that we tend to focus on automotive isn't just, you know, the many sensors within the vehicle, but also with the actual OEMs, with the factory floor, making sure that they're suffering as little downtime as possible. And I think there's, you know, we see as an IoT specific organization that in a lot of cases, you know, those leaf devices that aren't necessarily connected to the network, as it were, are quite often forgotten. So, you know, it's making sure that whole network is protected, isn't it, really? We don't want to leave any devices out of being protected when it comes to cybersecurity. And there are other ways of connecting those edge and leaf devices, aren't there, Stash, so that they are actually part of the overall network, and in that way can actually be affected by a cyber attack, can't they?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a good observation. In fact, I was at a seminar yesterday where a key member of the FBI gave a keynote speech, and his comment was, forget the whole concept of looking at threat intrusion, right? It's going to happen anyway. So it's an overstatement, but it's going to happen. So where we need to be is in the response phase of that, and gear up into how can we instantly respond to something that's inevitably going to happen. And a lot of IT departments and so on are behind the 8 ball there, in terms of they have such stress in responding to, do I have a process, right, and ticking the boxes, yes I do, and getting the teams involved, that they miss a lot of what's almost the last mile of cybersecurity, which is, you know, zero trust across the entire vehicle architecture, and then ensuring that at the device level that you are secure, because you are going to get an intrusion, and at that point then the danger escalates. It impacts brand, it impacts all those different things. So you're right there, Louise, in terms of the devices themselves. They're the ones that can cause the catastrophic impact on society, as well as the OEM brand and so on, versus consumer information being stolen or whatever. It's horrible for the individual, but it's not catastrophic to society. So in this case, again, you have to expand your mind into what is the typical focus for automotive. 99% of conversations, even with this one, insurance and so on, typically focus on the vehicle, the consumer vehicle. That's only a small segment of the automotive industry. So if you look at critical infrastructure, emergency vehicles, ambulances, police vehicles, all the fleets of vehicles, trucks, and so on, that's all the automotive space. And the insurance industry has to have a policy process for risk assessment for those vehicles, right? But also those companies that are responsible for and impacted by an intrusion. So an OEM, right? You are responsible for this hack. How are you going to respond to that? And then that's going to obviously impact premiums. And if you don't react well, then your premiums are naturally going to go up. So it's a chicken and egg situation. So I think that was a great observation, Louise.
Thank you. Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
I think your point about you don't know about all the devices is a great one. Even outside of automotive, just in general, we'll talk to a new prospect all the time, and we say, oh, tell us about your network, and like, oh, we don't have a network, just Wi-Fi, add the laptops, cool. And I'm like, do you have a printer? Well, yeah, of course we have a printer. There's a printer on there. And then how about those video cameras? Well, yeah, the video cameras are on there, but so then all of a sudden there's like 100 devices, and you're like, yeah, there's no network. I get it. And obviously true in manufacturing and really any space, very difficult to understand your whole attack surface. Going back even, let's go back onto the vehicle, the whole 100 million lines of code. I mean, you think about the infotainment system, you think about all these other elements, it's like, well, this isn't safety. I mean, this isn't deploying the airbags or the brakes or,
Right.
that sort of thing, right? But that infotainment system is a huge attack surface for someone to get in and to damage the vehicle. The other piece is, when you think about how many components are in a automobile, you have one chipset that has a serious vulnerability, and let's just pick like the Samsung Exynos one that's recent news past few months. Google Pixel, they patched it like right like that. Samsung, they patched it maybe a couple months later, right? And so basically, if you had a Samsung, you were vulnerable to a unauthenticated over-the-air attack. They also make an automotive chipset. How quickly do you think did they patch all those vehicles? I'm going to say they're still not patched and probably won't be for months or years. So the attack surface problem is a real one, and thinking that through, modeling it, thinking about what additional controls you put in place is a real important one for us to be able to promote automotive safety and just general cyber safety.
Yeah, I think one question that's arisen just from what you've said regarding that automotive chipset as well there, Rob, is once that car is out and in the market and owned publicly, whose responsibility is it then? Is it then that the manufacturer then has to do like a recall, bring that vehicle in? And realistically, is it then the end user's responsibility to bring the vehicle in and get that patched? Because it's not like you can put, force someone's arm up their back and make them bring the car in, is it? So, who would be at fault if something did go wrong, and it hadn't been patched, it's just a minefield, isn't it?
Yeah, let's hope that's never litigated in court, because that would mean that there was a horrible situation. In general, some of those things probably can be done with an over-the-air update. So if you think about, especially, let's say Tesla, who's more on the leading edge in this space, they're probably, or they are pushing a lot of those changes. I don't know if how easy it is to do an over-the-air update for this particular vulnerability. You have others where maybe they issue a recall, but like next time you go into the dealer, then they do it. So it's not necessarily that you're specifically scheduling it. But then, of course, how many times do people just never go into the dealer? They have their local mechanic, and that vulnerability could be out there for years. So as you said, it is a real tough one, and hopefully we will not find out who owns the liability, because that would mean that something bad has happened.
No, yes, totally agree with that one. So when it comes to we've covered off like insurance and also like really the manufacturer themselves, but now government is getting involved as well with the legislation side of things. So we've seen the we've all heard of SBOM. So the executive order 14028 was announced by the White House, and essentially part of that includes software bill of materials. So that's obviously best described sort of like as an inventory of all the software within a device. However, when your device is a car, that makes things a bit more difficult. Or even when you've got thousands of devices within the factory and the manufacturing process itself as well. Now, as part of that, we've seen that it states that products must be designed, developed, and produced with an appropriate level of cybersecurity at the time, but also that products must be delivered without any known vulnerabilities. Now, I highlighted the word known there because, we see like a 0-day attack every other week at the moment. It's crazy how often they're coming about. And another stat I found was that 80% of exploits are published before the CVEs are even released. So how on earth are we supposed to keep up with that? How do we monitor it? And is SBOM really the be all and end all of making sure that everything that goes out, everything that within the factory itself as well, is actually up to date and ready in case vulnerability?
I think the SBOM is a good control that has utility in the industry. To your point, Luis, though, I mean, you're talking about, in a car, I'm going to say thousands of libraries of different pieces of software that are in there. So, what are the chances that none of them, when the product ships, have a vulnerability? Like pretty much zero. I do think it's very useful, though. Let's just say there's a very exploited vulnerability for a particular library. Having that SBOM is really useful in tracing that back and saying, okay, here's where we need to focus. So I do think it's a good control. But just like your corporate network or your cloud systems have a whole bunch of layered defense in depth type controls, your automobile needs the same thing, because the answer is we are never going to be able to patch our way to success with such a complicated device. And so, where are the monitoring tools? Where are the things that are basically, I would say like EDR, antivirus to kind of combat malware that's being attacked? Where are the kind of, I would say, good operational controls by the manufacturer and the dealer to prevent easy access to the vehicle? And so, we do need a lot of maturity in those areas to be able to have confidence, because, the SBOM, great control. I think it's a good thing to have. Totally unrealistic to think that there's going to be zero vulnerabilities. The product will never, ever, ever, ever ship.
Yes, I think that's an interesting point. Oh, Sai, were you going to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, Thanks, Stas. I think it is interesting actually, and cyber resilience, being cyber resilient in this hyper connected environment can be a tough task. And I look back to when I was first gifted my first mobile phone, and it was the one off the Matrix that I thought was really cool, that flipped down. But it wasn't actually that cool. But it was just a phone. That's all it did. It was able to make calls and send text, a text, and that was it. And when we look now at today, the original smart device, our mobile phones that are able to communicate and have multiple layers of software on, so that we're able to do a plethora of things. We've come a long, long way. I think some of the firms that we work with, aside from the technology, and we're focusing on the technology here, but there's also a human factor element to this as well, the people and process side. And some of the firms that we speak to, they often think, well, why me? It's the old why me scenario. Why would they target me? It's not necessarily that you're being targeted. You may be the low-hanging fruit, or you may have a misconfiguration, or one of your employees may click on something that they weren't supposed to. So it may not be targeted. It could be collateral damage, like we've seen with the supply chain, in recent times. It could just be that, unfortunately, you are that low-hanging fruit. And I think now that we do have this sort of increasing reliance on technology and the connectivity, more than what we've ever seen before, going back to the attack surface, of course, it means the attack surface has increased significantly. And I think this is important to note. It's important to be managed accordingly, so that you can put in those safer practices and countermeasures to sort of reduce the risk. I think the insurance market, we're trying to work really hard with our insureds towards safer practices, and for ourselves, we believe that we can do that for cyber risk as a whole. So, as I mentioned, we're not just solely focused on insurance or security defense techniques. We want to break down the communication barriers, those communication barriers between risk, finance, and security. Provide them with that tool that provides them with, hey, actually, firstly, we were talking about this a moment ago, do you actually, if there's assets that you're not aware of, that tells us that maybe you don't have an inventory, or you not have a process of asset discovery. If you're not doing that, how are you, ever going to understand, what your true value at risk is? If something is compromised, what does that impact look like? Not just from an operational, but on financial terms as well. What is your maximum tolerable downtime? What is your recovery time objective? And only by knowing these things are you able to then correlate that into, okay, we're willing to accept this, and that means that you're willing to pay for it. So just be aware of that. Finance, yeah, if you're accepting this risk, we're willing to pay for it. Are we willing to mitigate? And if so, how do these businesses navigate the vendor market? There's so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there. It's difficult for them. We speak to our customers all the time. It's like, well, we know we need to do this, but we're not sure how to prioritize it, or who to go, who to choose. And that due diligence on those vendors takes a lot of time. We like to sort of navigate and steer them through that FUD, and sort of, take that time, that effort, that pressure, which is money at the end of the day, to provide those solutions for them. So yeah, again, businesses should be looking at they can reduce their exposure, and it's a combination of that accountable risk transfer, which is your insurance policy. If you don't do what we've just previously discussed, you're not really going to understand how much coverage you need. Okay, and you don't want to get that wrong. You don't want to be blowing through your coverage within the first 24 hours. Secondly, is understanding having not just understanding what you need to do in regards to sort of risk mitigation or cyber hygiene, but actually ensuring that it's actionable. Okay, long lists of, hey, we need to do this, don't really help. As I mentioned, it needs to be prioritized. And thirdly, having that visibility, on your network. So prevention's great. We need prevention, but we also need monitoring, on a network's devices, any endpoints that we have. And I think having that monitoring helps us identify potential events and hopefully and incidents earlier, so that we can have that truly effective and timely response. However, having monitoring without a response, and I'm stealing this from SANS because I know this is a SANS term here, but monitoring without an effective response really adds little or no value to an organization. And we do see that time and time again. Hey, we put in this big fancy tool that's cost hundreds of thousands, if not, more, and it's not manned properly. People aren't trained up on it properly. They don't have the efficient resources or money to then continue manage that service as it should be. Monitoring without a response adds little or no value to an organization.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like a previous organization I used to work at, also sold like endpoint detection. However, if like as you said, if that tool isn't set up properly in the first place, there's no point even having it, especially if it's not monitored 24/7. If it's monitored by an IT team that's in between 9 and 5 and the notification comes through at 3 a.m, what are you going to do? You're not going to do anything. So brilliant points there, Si. So obviously around that as well, we have like scope creep as well, don't we? The impact of vulnerability across different areas of insurance. So Stash, could you give us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, Si, I think you touched on that in terms of the broad spectrum of insurance and the intrusion and the complexities of cyber attacks across a broad spectrum of everything. So we've been talking very much specifically on the vehicle side, OEM side and whatever, how OEMs get insured and the vulnerability there. But what occurred to me just now on the question, Louise, was that if you look at, for example, the consumer themselves and the connected vehicle, it's probably triggered by you, Si, waving your phone around. It's now no longer just a vehicle in isolation or the phone in isolation. So there's been a huge interest with the OEMs on subscription pricing for their business model because they're not making enough money in vehicle production. So it's connected car to connected infrastructure, house to car to work, right? Work to car to work with the phone and so on, everything being interconnected. So you now get into the realms of security for the individual, and which directly impacts insurance. So if you take the example of transfer of ownership, that's becoming really quite critical. So there's been cases where, for example, there was one recently with a GM vehicle. A guy bought a used GM vehicle in Florida from a previous owner in Detroit and contacted the guy and said, I've got all of your personal information, your family, where your house is, because, you just hit the navigation on the system and it just says, take me home. Right. So, so now you have the intrusion, no pun intended, of technology getting in the way of legislative points, which you mentioned, Louise. So PII, GDPR, and so on. So in the seminar, for example, I was in yesterday, from an American perspective, we're not tied down to the extent that the Europeans are. The Europeans are considerably ahead. And I think it came as a shock to many of the audience here where, there's a fine of a percentage, 2 to 4% of turnover if you're in violation of GDPR and PII information. The only equivalent here is in the health industry with HIPAA, right? With the HIPAA laws. So I think that then brings into, okay, so if I can get into the vehicle and, for example, just hit the garage door opener, I'm into your house. So if I can get into the vehicle, I can say, navigate me home to I can see it's a high net worth area, St. John's Wood, for example, in England, or somewhere in Manhattan, right? Whoa, this is good. Go straight to the house and go straight into the house itself through the garage door opener. So there, I don't know, Si or Bob, Rob, if you've seen this, but I've heard that from an insurance perspective, there seems to be some talk about ranking vehicles based on safety, security, and intrusion, so that, for example, eventually someone like JD Power will have a 5-star rating, right, for the vehicle for specific cyber insurance, cyber intrusion. And if you're a 1-star, you don't get insured. End of.
I,
So have you heard
that
about that?
would be super welcome, and whether it's JD Power or whether it's the government, to me, the best thing would be if there was a rating, if there was a cyber safety, because will everyone care about it? No. I mean, people probably
Right.
care more about the crash bit, but some people will care. The insurers will care. The fleet buyers will care. Some segment of the population will care, and that will drive better cyber hygiene for the whole industry.
Yeah.
And so, I think that would probably be the best, not JD Power, but the best legislation would be essentially you got to disclose, or the National Transportation Safety Board publishes those rankings, because without the information today, I didn't even bother having this. We bought a car the past couple of months. I didn't even bother having a discussion with my wife about the cyber safety of the vehicle. I was like, okay, this isn't safe, but what am I to do? Because I couldn't tell you if I bought that other one that would be safer. No idea. But that information will be power. Some segment of consumers will use that. The big companies that are making purchases, insurers will do it, and everyone will be safer, even the people that don't care.
Yeah.
So I think the final question that I have, and I know we need to finish very soon, is really looking at insurance overall, for whether that be the OEM or the end user, regulatory bodies and things as well. How do we feel that the insurer and the regulatory bodies, even in this case the US government, could work better to help manufacturers fix vulnerabilities and protect their customers' purchases?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. The one thing I just talked about, I think the rating system would be great.
Yeah.
I do think on the the SBOM point, or the open source libraries, I do think there's probably a role for government for very common libraries. There's a tragedy of the commons with some of these open source libraries. They may be used in hundreds of thousands or millions of projects, but yet it's 3 people that maintain it, and they don't they do it as a project of love, or maybe they get a teeny bit of money of consulting on it, but it's not like they're getting the economic value of the millions of users of their tool. So this is exactly the place where a government help would say, we're going to create a fund for funding cyber fixes for the top 10,000 open source projects. And that would significantly improve, not just for automotive, but just the whole industry. Everyone would be safer. I do think the data, providing more data would be valuable. This whole pushing on controls, you have to do X and Y and Z. To me, it's a whack-a-mole game, because what happens is, let's say there are 100 things you need to do. If you make a reg around 80 of them, the bad guys are going to attack the 20% that you didn't touch, right? And it's just going to be impossible to effectively create regulations across everything. Now, maybe you put regulations around the most high-risk areas where the bad guys certainly are, but just inviting government to do all these things is going to create a lot of cost, but with minimal benefit, versus better data, centralized focus on the highest risk areas, and maybe help on the open source front. I think those 3 things would significantly improve the industry from a cyber perspective.
Fantastic. Si?
Hey, yes, no, and I completely agree with that. I think for ourselves, to partner with government wherever we can. I know we have close relationships with the NCSC, work with them on a number of projects, including the cyber insurance working groups that are ongoing, where we're able to share information. Same in the US with CISA. We're part of the ransomware working group there. Like you say, the markets have developed over the years. It's not just about paying out anymore. It's about how we can help reduce some of that residual risk during the time of an incident. Again, that's why we have a global panel of incident response vendors, from privacy law firms, digital forensics, crisis communications, everything that ransomware negotiators, everything that a business would need in order to sort of have the best possible response. And I think now, it's, whether a company is a victim of a cyber attack, it can sometimes be out of the control. But, if we can get in there early and help them prepare and provide them with these risk services, hopefully we can sort of, mitigate the risk of that happening. Or if we can't, because there is no silver bullet, as we discussed, we want to be able to make sure that they can still add value to their customers during that crisis situation.
Fantastic. Stash, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I would. I think dovetailing on Rob's and Sai's comments, I think collaboration is a key factor here. You've got the private sector, commercial sector working somewhat well together, but the government is, I think, particularly well phased to assist in collaboration. So one of the things that you'll find is a lot of these intrusions actually start and are present currently in infrastructure, in corporations, as long as 18 months before they're discovered. So these guys are really going into the systems and worming their way through, but the stuff is all dormant until such time as they decide to make the hack or ransomware public. So in your supplier structure, if you look at an OEM, having your supplier early on discover something that they have, there should be a process of making that information public to your OEM customers, right? And vice versa. That's a great way to get ahead of things. And then where it's critical, bring the government in at that point. So, for example, yesterday, and I think it's very apropos for today, the FBI will come in and see you. They will come in and bring their resources on the state level and a local level if you've had an intrusion, basically over $5,000, all right? But obviously there's lots of stuff with, you had to do your servers and whatever, so it's $300,000-$400,000 in an escalated cost. But they'll come in and they have equipment and so on that they can allow you to use through them to actually analyze these risks that you just mentioned just now, that are common things in common files that people know are exposed, right? And they can put tests through those. So I think collaboration, I think, is going to be really critical, because it means you can react at speed and hopefully get ahead of things quicker than currently, where then there's more damage, right?
Oh, brilliant. So yes, collaboration is key for everyone involved. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. I feel like we've provided a very informative discussion across such a broad subject matter as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah, I look forward to speaking to you all soon.
Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Take care.
bye.
Thank you.